Hello, welcome back. Today we are going to recommend some books. I haven't done just a regular old recommendations video in a while, so I thought it was the perfect time. And today we're talking about historical fiction. I absolutely love historical fiction. This channel originally started as mainly a thriller channel, and I did like one historical fiction video. As my reading tastes have changed, I have just really grown to love historical fiction to the point where I actually consider it one of my favorite genres. Like I said, I already have a video recommending historical fiction books on my channel. I will link it down below. So just know that I still stand by all of those recommendations in that video. But today we're talking specifically about historical fiction that has nothing to do with World War II. Main thing that I always hear about historical fiction is that people get really burnt out on the books about World War II or historical fiction books about war. And I agree with that because I too get very easily burnt out on war books. So these are some recommendations that are not about war, and let's just get into it. First recommendation is The Help by Kathryn Stockett, and I have loved this book for so many years. I remember reading this in high school and just falling in love with it, and the movie is really good as well. This is about Abilene, and she is a black maid in Jackson, Mississippi in the 1960s. She teams up with a young white socialite named Skeeter because Skeeter's maid, Constantine, has mysteriously disappeared. And together they write a tell-all book on what it's like to be a maid in the Deep South. And this is very much a character-driven book, but there's also a good amount of plot too. And I love getting to learn about all of the different families in this town and the lessons that they learn and some of the lessons that they're taught, whether they want to or not. What historical fiction video would be complete without Kristen Hanna? Today I'm going to talk about The Great Alone. And this is set in the 1970s, and it's about a family who flees to Alaska, which is the last frontier. They want to live off the grid and be away from society because the father in this book has been to Vietnam and he struggles with PTSD. So this family thinks that Alaska will give them a new start, and it very much is living off the grid. There's no electricity, there's very harsh winters. This family learns so much, not only how to live in Alaska, but also about each other. And there's a sweet love story in here as well. I just really loved a lot of things about this book. I cried a couple times when reading it, which doesn't happen very often. Next, we're going to talk about Only the Beautiful by Susan Meisner, and this was one of my favorite books that I read last year. And this is about Rosie, and Rosie finds herself orphaned in the 1930s in California, and the owners of the winery that her family worked for decide to take her in until they realize that she's pregnant. Not only that, but Rosie is able to see colors when she hears sounds, and her parents always told her don't tell anybody because they won't see it as an ability or a special talent. They'll see it as something to be fixed. So sure enough, she is shipped off to what she thinks is going to be a home for wayward girls, but it actually ends up being an asylum. And then there's another timeline about 10 years later in the 1940s with a woman named Helen who's living in, I believe, Austria, and she actually smuggles disabled children out of Austria. And if you know anything about my reading and my reading tastes, this book has so many elements that I just love. Asylums, disabled children, found family, wineries. It really is just a perfect Lena book. Okay, let's go a little bit further back in time to the early 1800s. This book is The House is on Fire by Rachel Beanland, and this is set in Richmond, Virginia. And this is a work of fiction, but it's based on a real event that happened in Richmond in the early 1800s. And this is set during Christmas time, and during a theater performance, there is a fire and the entire theater goes up in flames. And this has multiple perspectives, but not so many that you get confused. So you really get to hear what happens from a lot of different points of view. There's a stagehand, there's a socialite, there's a servant. This book is tragic, not just the theater fire, but also the other things that are happening in these people's lives. But this was a really neat character study on all of these people that experience the same type of trauma and what happened to them as a result of it. And then the last book we're going to talk about is The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon. And this is a work of fiction, but it's inspired by a real person named Martha Ballard. And Martha is a midwife in Maine, and she is called to examine the body of a man that was found in the frozen river. And she thinks that this man that was found dead in the river is also a man who's been convicted of multiple assaults towards women in the area. Being the closest thing to a doctor that this town has, she goes on this wild goose hunt to figure out, is this man the one who has been assaulting women in the town, and how is she going to protect the women in her town from men like this? She has a big family herself. I love the character of her husband, one that is very ahead of his time. She herself has a lot of children, and you learn a lot about childbirth in that time and what it was like to be a woman in the late 1700s. This is atmospheric. It is such a quick read. It seems like a big book, but I flew through this in like 2 days. All right, there you have it. 5 books that are not about World War II. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. And I have a couple of ideas in mind about some different recommendation videos I can do with some different themes. But if you have any ideas, definitely leave them in the comments below and I'll try to make a video about them. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit that subscribe button. It really helps out my channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!